Hi everyone, this is Tracy for Cardstock Warehouse. Today I'm going to be using Materica Acqua Cardstock, both the 8.5 by 11 and the 12 by 12, to go ahead and make a folio type album. If you've seen the blog at Cardstock Warehouse, you know I've done a regular album once before with regular pages. This is more of a folio style, so just to give you a sample of what I make. You're going to need a bone folder, a paper trimmer, a scoreboard, some score tape in assorted sizes. Here I have 1/4 of an inch, 1/2 an inch. I'm going to be using 5/8 of an inch and also 1 inch. To complete this project, you'll also need a 12 by 12 piece of lightweight to medium weight chipboard. I'm using 30 point and some liquid adhesive. To start, I'm going to go ahead and take an 8.5 by 11 piece of cardstock and cut my first cut to 6.5 by 6.25. We are going to need to score this on the portrait side, so I'm just going to make sure I'm on the shorter side of this cardstock. I'm also going to label it here, so our measurement again was 6.5 by 6.25, and we're going to score it 1 inch on both sides. We're going to do it on one side, then flip it, and then score another inch on the other side. Then we're going to use our bone folder to fold up the 2 tabs that we've created. And this is going to be our back page of our folio book. So what we're doing is creating a place for other pages to go. I'm going to have a center for where we can do some decoration. So again, this is our 6.5 by 6.25 piece, scored at 1 inch on both sides, portrait, the shorter side. And that means the area we're going to have to decorate here is going to be about 6.5, and that's about 4.25 now. Again, because we're using the other 2 tabs for decoration. So I'm going to start writing measurements down to make it easier for us later. So just grabbing my pencil, measuring again to double check, and we're going to write down our measurements for decoration, which are going to be 6.5 by 4.25. Put that aside, and let's do our next cut. And I'm going to use a scrap because we're going to cut this panel to be 6.5 by 4. So 6.5 by 4. And we have to score this portrait again, so the shorter side. And we're going to go, so that's the 6.5 by 4, and we're going to score 1 inch on the 4-inch side, or portrait. And just again measuring, so from the score line, we would expect that our measurement to be 3 inches and still 6.5 across. So on our sticky note, just writing down again the measurements that we cut, where we scored, and our decoration measurements. So how we're going to decorate. So 6.5 by 3 is the area for us to decorate. Using our bone folder, just to smooth that crease. And this is going to attach to the top of the folio, right here via score tape. I noticed that this label is backwards. Our folio is going to open up first. So that'll be the top, and that'll be our first page inside. So we need score tape. So let's grab, 1 inch score tape is too large. You don't want this to overhang. So you can use a combination of score tapes. I'm going to use 5/8 of an inch and 1/4 of an inch, and that gets me just slightly less than 1 inch. And I'm going to put that on the margin of the first piece we cut. Just basically trying to cover most of the piece, but not going over. So there's my 5/8. And here is 1/4. And again, this is going to attach, right? The back of this will attach to the back of that. So we could just remove the score tape. I find it easier to do this from the back, but you might find it easier to do from the front. Just remove, okay, or not remove. Remove the backing on our score tape. And then line up the two margins that we just scored on each piece, and we want to attach them. And I just want to get it as exact as possible, using our bone folder just to burnish it down, make sure we have a good contact there. And now you can see we have our page 1 and our back page. And we're going to continue to add to this folio pages. So now we need that bottom flap. So that's going to be our next thing that we're going to cut and score. For our next page, we're going to grab another sheet of 8.5 by 11 cardstock, and we're going to go ahead and trim this to 6.5 by 3.5. So 6.5, flip it, 3.5. And again, we're going to score this portrait as well, so the shorter side. So just putting this into our scoreboard, I'm going to write down our measurements. Again, 6.5 by 4, 6.5 by 3. And we're going to go ahead and score this at 1 inch. Okay. And then we're going to fold up on the score line, and that's going to be the two margins that we attach. Just again, to confirm our measurements, still 6.5, and we have 6.5 by 2.5 to decorate. So I'm going to write this down. This just makes it easier for me later to decorate, and I'm going to show you a demo of me, how I do my decorations before we build our cover. Okay, so same as the top margin, we have to use some score tape to attach that bottom margin. Again, we don't want to use 1 inch, it's just a little too big. So I'm going to use 5/8 of an inch and 1/4 of an inch score tape to attach these two flaps. And just using my bone folder to make sure that score tape is really on that cardstock, removing the backing, and then grabbing the bottom flap and attaching it. Again, from the back is easier for me, but whatever works for you. And attaching those two 1 inch margins together to make our bottom flap of our folio album. So again, we have our top flap, our bottom flap, those will eventually be magneted together, and our back page all ready. Now we really want to make, see our bottom top, we want to make pages that come out from the side, so side pages as well. Because again, this is the folio style, so there's no formal book binding, it's just, flaps. So we're going to create our 4th page now. Again, for that leftmost flap, we're going to cut a piece of cardstock to be 5.5 by 4 1/8. 4 1/8. And we're going to go ahead and score this landscape in 2 places, but let's first go ahead and write down our measurements so we don't forget. So our measurements for this again are 5.5 by 4 1/8, and we're going to score landscape at 1 inch and 1.5 inches. Move that 1.5. Okay, and this was again landscape. And let's go ahead and fold up. Actually, let's measure first. We're gonna decorate the area that's gonna be 4 by what should be 4 1/8. And again, we're gonna fold up on the crease to make a flap, just like we did for the first 2 flaps. But this is gonna be attached on the side. So we have a flap where it attaches, that's that 1 inch, but we also have a very small margin, which measures at 1/2 inch. And that's something we can decorate later, but that's 1/2 inch for our margin and about 1 inch for us to attach. So again, putting on our sticky, just so you see, I put a sticky on there that has our 5.5 by 4 1/8. We're gonna have to write our measurements, our decorate measurements, but again, using score tape, 5/8 and 1/4 inch. And same thing as the first 2, we're just gonna use that 1 inch margin to go ahead and attach this to the back of our folio. I find it easier to flip over my folio, and I'm going to show you that here. I think it's the easier way to attach, but you could attach it, if it's easier for you, you could attach just on the side here. I'm going to flip it. So when we flip it, it becomes the right side, not the left side of the folio. So flipping. And then we're, again, attaching that 1-inch margin right to that, what will become left-hand side, but right now it's on our right because, again, it's backwards. So attaching our flap as straight as possible using our bone folder to burnish. And then when we flip it over, right, it's our left flap. So now we have a top flap, a bottom flap, and a left side flap that we've created for our folio. Let's do the right side. And again, as you can see, you can continuously go ahead and add pages on the sides or on the top, as long as you're staying within the margin that we initially created, which for us is 1 inch. We've created a 1-inch margin at the top. So we got to keep our folio under 1 inch in height. So let's go ahead and do the next page. We're going to need a long piece of cardstock for our next page. We're going to need, I'm just going to grab a 12 by 12 because it was easier, but we're going to need to cut a 9.5 by 4 1/8 piece of cardstock. So 9.5. By 4 1/8. See? And we're going to put this into our, not this big piece, the other piece. We're going to put the 9.5 by 4 1/8 into our scoreboard. And we're going to score landscape again, because again, these are our side pages. And we're going to score in 3 places. We're going to score at 1 inch. I'm going to write this down for you first. We're going to score at 1 inch, 1 3/8 inch, and 6 inches on the landscape side. Again, 1 inch, 1 3/8 inch, and 6 inches on the landscape side. So 1 3/8, there we go. And then one more time at 6 inches. Didn't move that over quite far enough. There we go. So now again, we're going to attach this on the right-hand side of the folio when it's facing us. So again, folding up that 1 inch margin, that's where we're gonna attach that flap. And then we have a little margin, which is 3/8 of an inch, right? So it's gonna attach just like the left one did, but on the right. We have a smaller margin on the right-hand side, right? It's 3/8 of an inch. And then we have a flap. And you can have the flap go in or out. I decided to do the flap to open like a Z. So you can do it however you'd like though. So when I attach it, you'll see how I've kept the flap up. And we'll close our folio with magnets later. So I just wanted to show you, same method. We're going to go ahead and put our score tape, again, 5/8 of an inch and 1/4 of an inch, or again, just something that's shy of a total inch when you add them together. We're going to remove the backing after we burnish and make sure it's stuck down. We're going to flip over our folio. So this will eventually be our rightmost page, but now it's our left because we're flipping it over. It's easier for me. Just lining up that 1 inch margin, right? We want to make sure that, 1 inch flap. We want to make sure that 3/8 of an inch margin is left free and clear, so our folio opens and closes. And now, as you can see, we have right and left pages for our folio. I want to show you how to add one more page. Let's go ahead. Ooh, I actually forgot to write the measurements. I know we measured them before. So it was 4 by 4 1/8, I believe, for us to decorate this. Let's just write it down so we don't forget. It makes decoration easier, and you'll see when I decorate. So 4 by 4 1/8. These are office pencils. One of my crafty friends got them for me. And then let's write the measurements to the leftmost piece. So we've got 4 1/8 by 4 1/8 that we can decorate. Just double checking my measurements. It's a lot easier to fix it at this stage than later. And I'm adding another Post-it note here, writing how large this is to decorate, and it looks like it's about 3.5 by 4 1/8. I'm just gonna write that down to make my life easier when decorating. You can skip this step and just measure when you go. Okay, I want to add one more page to show you that you can continue to add pages as long as your margins stay within your first top and bottom initial margin. So let's go ahead and create one more page and let me show you how you can add it on either side. So we're going to cut another piece of paper to measure 6 and 4 1/8. So 6 by 4 1/8. And we're going to put this in our scoreboard, again landscape, because this again is a side page. And we're going to go ahead and score at 1 inch. Oh, there we go, landscape. 1 inch and 1 5/8 inches. Let me go ahead and write this down. So you have a nice sticker. And these are just full stick Post-it notes. They don't leave any residue and it helps me remember what I did. So again, scoring at 1 and 1 5/8 inches. And then folding on the tab, then folding on the margin there. Again, that 1 inch is where we're gonna attach to our book, and that other margin is giving us that height. Now, remember that was 1/2 inch, that margin originally. And the right side was, I believe, 3/8 inch. So this could go on either side. It's completely up to you. I'm gonna go ahead and put it on my left-hand side. So I'm gonna follow the exact same process as we did before. I'm gonna put it on my left. You could put it on either side. So just flipping it over, flip my ticket since I know which way it's going now. Grab my score tape. Again, same process, right on that 1 inch flap. And you can make your flap smaller. You can resize this album. This is just the easiest way for me to show you. A 1/2 inch would work too. It's up to you. Flipping it over. So again, it will wind up on the left-hand side, but right now we're looking at the right because it's the back of the album. Removing the score tape. And just applying this to the back of the album. The 1 inch on top of the other 1 inch in the back. Burnish it down and flip it over. And now you have 2 pages on the left and 1 page attached on the right. Reinforce my folds there. Make sure they're nice right angles. There we go. So we have our page, 2 pages on the left. Again, writing down our measurements. This should be 4 3/8 by 4 3/8 by 4 1/8. Yeah, 4 1/8. So just writing that down, double checking, of course. 4 3/8 by 4 1/8. And here we have our first page, our left page, and our folio. Now the best thing I think to do is put magnets on now. This helps me. I have both basic gray, small and large magnets. They have a positive and a negative side on each of them with some sticky, some pre-stick. So this makes it easier for me to just put my magnets on now before I decorate. It helps me know exactly where I need the main magnets. I might put more magnets as I decorate, but I know I'm gonna need one on the front, right? I know I'm gonna need one over here, right? It's popping up. So I'm gonna put magnets now so I don't forget them as I'm decorating. So using a small magnet, grabbing a positive and a negative, and I'll attach the 2 magnets on the non-sticker side. So I have a plus on one side and a minus on the other. Removing the adhesive on either side of the magnet, doesn't matter. I'm going to go ahead and put this down on the flap, the rightmost flap. remove the backing on the other side of the magnet and then press down once I'm sure my margin is nice and straight. And I've attached my magnets. Super easy. Probably need another magnet right there to make sure that that stays closed. So I'm just going to move my sticky. Grabbing another set of magnets, a positive and a negative. Again, sticking them together. Sticker sides out. Placing one down on the right flap, then closing the left flap, making sure we have a nice right angle before we do it. And now we have flaps that are magnetized for our album. So when we put this into our nice cover, it'll close very nicely. We need one more, definitely, right in the center, right? Our initial top and bottom fold flaps. You could use a small magnet. I tend to like to use the large magnet for the main closure. So I'm going to grab some of the larger basic gray magnets. I've got to open this pack. Okay, grabbing a positive and negative magnet again. Stickers out. Go ahead and pull off one of the stickers, adhere one to the, I'm going to do it to the bottom, center, removing the top sticker, and gently closing the folio. Well, there we go. Try that again. And gently closing the folio, making sure again I have nice right angles in my folio. Oh, I'm having trouble today. Again, closing that nicely so you have nice right angles. I don't push hard on this. I kind of shove my fingers inside and grab it because I don't want to smush the folio. I want it to be nice and straight. And we have finished completing the folio portion of the album. We do have to create a hard cover, but I typically decorate before I actually go ahead and mount it into the hard cover. So I'm going to give you a demonstration of how I do my decorations. So let's just close this up nicely. So it goes left, right, left, top and bottom. I'll show you some decorating and then we'll make the hard cover. Okay, let's start decorating our folio. I always decorate the entire album before I put this into a hardcover casing. But right now I'm going to just decorate one of the flaps or one of the pages using Vermillion cardstock from Cardstock Warehouse, 110 pound. I chose this color because it goes with the pattern paper collection that I'm going to use for my album. You can use photographs, you can use whatever you want to decorate your album. The first thing I'm going to go ahead and do is cut a 2 7/8 by 3 7/8 strip of the Vermillion cardstock. And I'm going to score it at a 1/2 inch, not an inch, 1/2 inch. And that's just to make a flap, basically, an additional flap, just to show you a way to decorate where you can add pictures. So this could be like a 3 by 3, so you could do a little square photograph. Here I've selected some Stamperia paper that I really like, and I'm going to be using it to build my whole album and do all the decorating. This could be a top flap, it could be a side flap, and it's up to you. I'm going to do a little side flap, I think, with this because I have these cute tags. Now, before I adhere this tag, remember we wrote down our decorative measurements? We want to be able to decorate this paper. We had written down that this was 4 3/8 by 4 1/8. We want to be able to decorate it. And we have to do that before we put the flap on or after. We have to make that decision. So here I'm just cutting a 3 1/8 by 4 inch piece of pattern paper and another 1 inch by 4 inch piece of paper, right? And I'm going to first adhere this down before I put down my flap. So just flipping around and grabbing some liquid adhesive. You don't have to use liquid adhesive. You could, of course, use score tape. I prefer liquid adhesive. It gives me a few more seconds to get everything aligned. So just applying some liquid adhesive all the way around your pattern paper or your photograph and affixing that to the leftmost flap on top. And then I'm going to also attach this little strip. I like to kind of mix up my paper when I decorate, so I'll use a big piece of one and then I'm flipping the other side over. So and I hope the decorative measurements we wrote down earlier will help you. You could also ink the sides of your pages. My album doesn't really call for it, but if you're doing something with a vintagey look and you wanted to put some ink, this would be the time to do it before you glued. You can use your bone folder to make sure the pages are, the decorative paper is appropriately adhered. We also want to decorate this little border. So we need to measure. If you remember, this margin was 5/8 of an inch by 4 1/8. So our paper, decorative paper, has to be smaller than that. So I'm going to make mine 4 long and about 1/2 inch across. And again, you can do you can go edge to edge if you want. You just want to don't overlap the margins. So I'm going to do 1/2 by 4. I'm just going to cut some decorative paper. And we're just going to use liquid adhesive to adhere this 1/2 inch by 4 inch piece on our what will be our leftmost page, but since we have it flipped over, our rightmost page. And again, score tape's fine as well. And then we've decorated the front side of this page fully, so just flipping over our album. So now again, we're ready to adhere this photo mat or this flap we created using our Vermillion cardstock. Again, this was 2 7/8 by 3 7/8, and we scored at 1/2 inch. To create that little flap, so that little tab there. And we're going to want to decorate the inside of that once we attach it. So again, we know it is, let me move this first, sorry. We know we have to do that margin too. We know the red cardstock, the margin here, we know we cut it to 1/2 inch by 3 7/8. So to decorate it, again, if you want to show the red cardstock, I'm just going to make it 1/8 of an inch shorter, the decorative piece. So my decorative piece for the inside margin is going to go ahead and be 1/2 of an inch by 3 3/4 of an inch. Just writing this down so we don't forget later. So we have our decorative piece for the inside ready to adhere, but before we adhere it, let's go ahead and attach our flap to our folio. I'm going to use score tape. I usually use, again, score tape whenever I'm attaching a page or a flap. I'm going to pick where I want it. And again, you could attach at the top, the bottom, the middle of the page. I'm going to go for the middle of the page, but it's really up to you. You're the designer. So mine's going to go in the middle. I've removed the score tape and I'm just going to go ahead and stick it in the kind of towards the right of the flap. And then I'm going to use liquid adhesive to adhere the decorative piece on the inside so it looks like it's more cohesive. Again, I'm going to use these cute tags from my paper collection to decorate my flap. However, you can use pictures. I did notice here that I probably should have used a magnet to make sure that this flap stays down, and I probably should have done that before I laid down the pattern paper onto the folio page itself, the one where the face is. So, but I'm gonna save it now. I'm gonna just grab 2 magnets, and this happens all the time. I forget to put a magnet on. And what I'm gonna do is put a magnet under the tag. So we'll go ahead and first close this thing. Then remove the sticker on the other side, close that red flap, and the magnet will adhere to the other side. And I'm going to cover this with a little, not a sticker, but a little piece of chipboard that I had that matched the collection. A sticker would be fine. Another piece of paper would be fine to decorate it with. And then I'm going to cover the other side, the red tag, just as we planned, flap with a tag, just as we planned before. So I'm going to do both the outside, and I'm going to grab another tag and cover the inside, making sure it's secure around the magnet. Just making sure that's well adhered, using your bone folder if necessary. And now we've decorated our first page. Now building the cover. I did want to again remind you that I decorate my entire album before I build the cover. So this is a great time to decorate before you go forward. Let's get started. So our album is 6.5 by 4 1/8. So in order to cover it, we need our cover to be bigger than our album size. Using a 12 by 12 sheet of chipboard, 30 point, I cut 2 pieces to be 6 3/4 by 4 5/8, and then I cut 1 spine piece to be 1 1/4 by, again, 4 5/8. Next, we have to do some cardstock cutting, and this is very similar to my other video how I cover every book pretty much the same. We're going to need 1 piece of 12 by 6 and 5/8 and 1 piece of 6 by 6 and 5/8 pieces of cardstock. So I'm going to again use our Acqua. Okay, so I have some Acqua cardstock. I've cut 1 piece to 12 by 6 by 5/8 and another piece to be 6 by 6 and 5/8. And what we're going to do first is, before we attach these together, we need to score these pages. So we're going to score the long piece, the 12 by 6 and 5/8. We're going to score it at the 1-inch margin on 3 sides. And again, flipping the other side, again, not that 1 inch. And then using our bone folder, I'm going to reinforce that first one I did, sorry. We're going to go ahead and fold up on all the margins. Again, use your bone folder, get a really tight fold. Then taking the shorter piece of paper, we're going to go ahead and do the same thing. We are going to score on only 2 sides this time. So we're going to score it portrait, right? Because we have to match this up. So we're going to score it portrait on the 1-inch sides. 1 inch on both sides. Excuse me, landscape. And again, just using your bone folder to make sure those folds are nice and tight. And here's where you're really going to need 1-inch score tape. This is the best way. We have to adhere these. We're going to overlap them by exactly 1 inch. So the easiest way to make sure you're doing exactly 1 inch is to, 1, work on a grid mat, but 2, grab 1-inch score tape. And what I'm going to do is go ahead and attach 1-inch score tape. You can see it's 1 inch. I'm going to attach 1-inch score tape to the longer piece of the paper on the non-scored side, straight across. And I'm gonna go over and a little beyond my paper so I get some help holding it so it'll stick to my mat. Using my bone folder to adhere this down, removing the backing, and then I'm carefully gonna take the other piece of cardstock and align it right on top of the score tape. And again, using my bone folder and then grabbing a piece of scissors to cut off that excess. And that just helped me hold it down again to make sure everything was straight. And now we're going to place our chipboard into our cardstock. But in order to do this, we need to make sure our spaces between our chipboard are equal. So the best way for me to do this is, what I do is get a 1/8 of an inch piece, a scrap piece of chipboard. And again, it's just a piece of scrap from a leftover piece that I have. And we're gonna make sure we leave an appropriate space when we're adhering this. You could adhere your chipboard to your cardstock using glue or using score tape. I'm gonna use glue. It just gives me some extra time to adhere in case I make a mistake. And just doing the left side first, right inside those score margins that we created. Making sure we can still fold down our cardstock and using a bone folder to make sure we've secured it properly. Using my scrap piece of 1/8 inch chipboard, I'm leaving that between the margin to make sure I have enough space. And I'm gonna put the binding piece next to it and then remove the scrap piece of chipboard once you're sure everything is straight. Repeating the same process on the other side, just again, holding down your scrap piece, putting liquid adhesive on, and attaching the right side of your cover. Our next step is to go ahead and score the right-hand side of our cover. We didn't do that earlier. This is just to make sure you really do have that 1 inch left, but approximately 1 inch, you want to make sure that you can go ahead and score the right side. I leave that because if it's 7/8 of an inch, it's fine too, but I really want my lines to be nice and tight. Perfect. Also, while you have your scoreboard out, you can just kind of give little divots in the side by your binding to make sure your binding closes nicely and your cardstock's not going to rip. So gently on a very, very, very small angle when you're using your bone folder here. Nice sharp corners. Great. Love it. Okay. Our next step is to tape the sides of our margins of our cover and fold them over. Here I'm using 5/8 inch score tape. Again, you just want to use something that's smaller than 1 inch. You don't want anything overhanging. If it's too tight here, your cardstock will crack. Now using your scissors, we want to cut off these corners on an angle. It doesn't have to be perfect. You just want to leave a tiny bit of room over the corner to make sure it's going to be covered. We're going to hide all of our endings anyway. So all you have to do is flip it over. This is how I look at it, and cut right above that nice X. And it's okay if it's curved. You can see mine's not perfect. You're not going to see it. And you want to do that on all 4 corners. Next, you're going to want to go ahead and remove the backing on each of the margins that we created, and you're going to fold over your cardstock onto your chipboard. You'll want to ever so gently bend over your corners and then grab a bone folder. And you're going to want to reinforce right where the binding meets the center. So you can run your bone folder all the way down. You can do this in your scoreboard if you want. I find it easier to do it not in a scoreboard here. And you can see now we have a nice sharp corner on our cover. Before we go ahead and cover the rest of that chipboard, I want to go ahead and make a ribbon closure for my book. So I'm going to grab 2 pieces of 18-inch ribbon, and it could be much smaller. I wind up cutting these later. This is just so I know I can tie a bow. And I'm going to use score tape to go ahead and adhere the ribbon both on the front and back side of the cover. Clarify front and back inside covers. And just sticking that down on both sides. Our next step is to cover the remaining parts of the chipboard with paper. So we need 2 parts, one for the front and back, and we do need something to cover that middle binding. So in order to do this, we're going to cut 2 pieces of cardstock, again in our Acqua, that are 6.5 by 4 3/8, as well as 1 piece that is 3 1/4 by 4 3/8. And just laying out the cardstock, we have to put that center binding under the 2 right and left pieces. So in order to do this, I find the easiest way is to take your bone folder and use your tool to go ahead and score lines right in the center of your book. Then again, use your bone folder to fold down on the score lines and make a nice tight fold. You then want to use score tape horizontally all across the back side of the binding. This will really help you get this adhered. Make sure everything is tight and remove the backing of the score tape. If you have any excess score tape, you can fold it over. I'm always messy. And then try and get this directly in the center where your score lines match up. Again, use your bone folder to make sure the contact points are tight. Oh, see, I didn't like how I positioned it. It wasn't exactly in the score line. So I'm just going to add some more score tape here and show you how to fix it. Trying again. This is the one place where I say definitely use score tape, not glue. You really want this to stick really well. Right in the center. Doing one side at a time. I'm holding up the left side as I do the right. And then adhering, making sure it bends nicely. Then adhering the right side, giving it some motion, testing it. And then what you want to do is reinforce those scores, right? You want to make sure this is a nice right angle. And just make sure we've got no issues. Again, you can always use your bone folder. Then take the 6.5 by 4 3/8 papers and using liquid adhesive or score tape, go ahead and adhere them to the inside, front, and back covers. You can use your bone folder to smear out any air bubbles or get any excess glue with a baby wipe or wet paper towel. Just very, very lightly. And again, I'm just making sure good contact, no air bubbles, everything closes nicely. Beautiful. Our last step is to go ahead and adhere our folio into the inside of our hardcover album. Before you do that, again, if you wanted to decorate your album cover or the folio itself, I would do that first. All you need to do is apply score tape to the back of the folio where our flaps are. And you're going to do it all the way across. If you find it easier to apply the score tape with the folio open, you can go ahead and do that as well. I would just close it before putting it into the album. Remove the backing on the score tape. And you're going to want to make sure your folio is centered on the back inside cover of your album. Once you have the proper placement, go ahead and double check first, then open up your folio. And you're going to want to use your bone folder on the last page to make sure that your folio is adhered down to the cover. Just tie your bow and you have a completed folio for photographs or for pretty pattern paper. Thanks for joining me today. See you later.